The rain was pouring down hard that Friday morning in New York City, streaking the tall glass windows of the bustling Manhattan Bank. Inside, a long line of tired faces waited, clutching checks, forms, and cards, each person silently wrestling with their private struggles. At the counter, a woman stood wearing a faded gray coat, her hair pulled back neatly but plainly, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid her debit card across the counter to the young banker behind the desk. He tapped his keyboard, frowned at the screen, and after a heavy pause, looked at her with sharp coldness. "You don't have the balance," he said bluntly, his words slicing through the fragile air like a blade. To everyone around, it was just another denial, another customer rejected by the merciless digits on a glowing computer screen. But what no one in that room knew, not the banker, not the waiting customers, not even the security guard by the door, was that the woman standing there owned the very bank he was working for. Before I take you deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that can change the way people see others, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Your support helps keep these true-to-life, inspirational tales alive. The woman's name was Evelyn Carter, and though her worn clothes made her look like she had nothing, her past was built from battles, pain, and choices that shaped her into something far greater than anyone could imagine. She had not always been this way. Overlooked, underestimated, dismissed by strangers who thought they could measure her worth through appearances. Years ago, Evelyn had lived in a modest home in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner to keep food on the table. Her father had left when she was only 6, and her mother used to tell her, "We may not have much, but we have enough, and you, Evelyn, you will have more." Those words stuck with her, carved deep into her heart. As a young girl, Evelyn excelled in school. She wasn't the most popular, but she was sharp, determined, and driven by a quiet fire. While her classmates dreamed of glamorous lives, she dreamed of stability, of never seeing her children cry because the rent was late, of never eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row. She studied late into the night under dim lamps, worked weekends at the grocery store, and saved every penny. When she earned a scholarship to Columbia University, she left Ohio with nothing more than 2 suitcases and her mother's unshakable faith. College was a battlefield. Evelyn didn't fit in with the wealthy students who drove expensive cars and wore designer clothes. She was the girl who took notes in secondhand notebooks and lived on instant noodles. Yet, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She studied finance, fascinated by the power of numbers, by how money shaped lives, dictated choices, and separated the comfortable from the desperate. She made a promise to herself. One day, she would create opportunities for people like her mother, people like herself, who were constantly judged and dismissed. After graduation, Evelyn threw herself into the financial world. The corporate offices were ruthless, dominated by men who looked past her, assuming her youth and gender made her unfit for leadership. She worked harder than anyone else, staying late, taking on projects nobody wanted, quietly proving her worth in every number she balanced, every deal she secured. She rose quickly, though not without scars. She endured insults, dismissals, and betrayals that would have broken many. But Evelyn had learned to turn pain into fuel. She didn't just want success for herself. She wanted to rewrite the rules of the game. Years passed, and Evelyn became known for her fearless decisions and razor-sharp instincts. While others played safe, she took risks that others called foolish, risks that built her empire brick by brick. With time, she acquired shares, built partnerships, and slowly began to buy into the very institutions that had once refused to believe in her. The final piece of her triumph came quietly, with no applause or headlines. She became the majority shareholder of a respected financial institution headquartered in New York City, the very bank where she now stood at the counter, being dismissed as though she were nobody. But before that moment in the bank, Evelyn had faced a trial that almost destroyed her. A financial crash had wiped out billions, and many investors lost everything. Evelyn herself nearly broke under the pressure. People turned on her, accusing her of recklessness. For a while, she lived quietly, choosing to disappear from the glamorous corporate world. She simplified her life, choosing not to flaunt her wealth. Instead of limousines and designer labels, she wore simple coats, lived in a modest townhouse, and took walks instead of private cars. People who passed her on the street assumed she was ordinary, even struggling. And that was how she preferred it. She had seen the cruelty of judgment, and she no longer cared to impress strangers. Which brings us back to that morning. Evelyn had walked into the bank not as its owner, but as a customer, carrying a simple debit card linked to a small personal account. The young banker behind the desk, barely in his 20s, had no idea who she was. He didn't see her as someone who built empires, who had weathered storms most couldn't imagine. He saw only her worn shoes, her plain coat, and her trembling hands. When he said, "You don't have the balance," there was a slight smirk in his tone, as though he took satisfaction in rejecting her. For a moment, Evelyn felt the sting, not of his words, but of what they represented. She thought of her mother, who had once been humiliated by a landlord demanding rent in front of neighbors. She thought of the countless people dismissed by society because they didn't look the part. She lowered her eyes, collected her card, and said nothing. The people in line behind her glanced away, pretending not to notice, but the silence was heavy, filled with judgment and assumptions. But Evelyn wasn't angry. She was calm, almost sorrowful. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, the owner of the very institution, had just been turned away like a beggar. And in that irony, she saw truth. The young banker wasn't evil. He was a reflection of a world that judged worth by surface appearances. A world that desperately needed change. That night, Evelyn sat in her townhouse, sipping tea by the window as the city lights flickered. She could have fired that banker with a single call. She could have walked into the CEO's office the very next morning and revealed her ownership, demanding apologies, demanding recognition. But Evelyn didn't want revenge. She wanted transformation. She wanted a world where the next woman in a faded gray coat wouldn't be dismissed as worthless. So she made a decision. The next week, Evelyn called a board meeting. Executives filled the grand room, shuffling papers, adjusting ties, unaware of the storm about to hit. When she entered, they all rose in respect, finally recognizing the power she carried. Evelyn announced a new initiative, a program dedicated to financial education and opportunities for working-class families, single mothers, and individuals overlooked by the system. She invested millions into community loans with zero interest, into job training programs, and into mentorship networks. She also ordered mandatory empathy training for every employee, from executives to tellers, ensuring that no one else would be humiliated at a counter simply because of how they looked. The story spread, first quietly, then like wildfire. Newspapers caught wind of the mysterious bank owner who had once been humiliated in her own building and used the experience not for vengeance, but for compassion. Evelyn's name became synonymous with resilience, grace, and power. She didn't just own a bank. She owned her story, her scars, and her ability to change lives. Months later, that same young banker found himself in a training seminar where Evelyn herself spoke. He recognized her instantly, his face flushing with shame as memories of that morning returned. Evelyn didn't mention the incident, didn't call him out. Instead, she spoke about dignity, about the unseen battles people face, about the importance of treating every person with respect, no matter how they appear. The young banker listened, tears pricking his eyes, realizing he had been given a second chance to not just work in a bank, but to work in service of humanity. Evelyn Carter's story became a living reminder that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks quietly in worn shoes, carrying lessons forged in struggle. She had been judged, dismissed, and overlooked, yet she used it all to build something bigger than herself, a legacy of hope, kindness, and change. And so, the next time someone sneers, "You don't have the balance," remember Evelyn. Remember that appearances lie, but strength, resilience, and compassion reveal the truth. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Your support keeps stories like Evelyn's alive, reminding the world that dignity belongs to everyone. Sparkles, and before you go, I'd love for you to comment below. Respect is priceless. Let's fill the comments with a reminder that kindness and respect cost nothing, but can change everything.